At 12:07 a.m., a grandfather calls 911, screaming about a dead child and a wounded mother. But every door in the house is locked. No intruder, no escape, and the mother's injuries. They look exactly like she did them to herself. It is just after midnight in Milton, Florida, when a 911 dispatcher answers a call that will forever change the lives of everyone involved. The voice on the other end belongs to Stephen Tuttle, a grandfather who has just forced his way into his daughter's home after hearing screams from outside. What he finds inside defies comprehension. His 6-year-old granddaughter, Valerie Oliva, lies motionless on the kitchen floor, her small body surrounded by blood. His daughter, April Oliva, is nearby, injured and covered in the same red stain, crying and speaking in fragments that make no sense. The dispatcher tries to keep Stephen calm, asking about weapons, about breathing, about who else might be inside. But Stephen cannot answer clearly. He is in shock, trying to process a scene that his mind refuses to accept. Within minutes, Santa Rosa County deputies are racing toward Nolan Drive, their sirens cutting through the quiet Florida night. They have no idea what awaits them. They do not know if they are responding to a home invasion, a murder-suicide attempt, or something far more disturbing. All they know is that a child is down, and every second of delay could mean the difference between life and death. The deputies arrive to find Stephen waiting outside, his hands shaking, his voice barely above a whisper. He points toward the front door, and the officers step into the unknown, their flashlights illuminating a scene that will haunt them for years to come. The first deputies through the door are met with chaos. The kitchen is awash in blood, smeared across the floor, splattered on the cabinets, tracked through the adjacent hallway. In the center of this horror lies Valerie, her small frame still and pale, her eyes closed. Beside her, April Oliva is slumped against the counter, conscious but barely responsive. She has a deep wound on her neck and another on her stomach, and her clothes are soaked in blood. The officers immediately call for medics and begin triage, trying to stabilize April while simultaneously scanning the room for any sign of an attacker. Their training kicks in despite the shock of what they are seeing. They check for pulses, apply pressure to wounds, and shout for additional units. But as they work, a troubling thought begins to form. The house is quiet now. No sounds of struggle, no footsteps fleeing, no broken windows or forced doors. The deputies begin to clear the rest of the home, moving room to room with weapons drawn, expecting to find a suspect hiding in the darkness. They check bedrooms, closets, and bathrooms, finding nothing but silence. Then they reach the garage door, still unopened, and the tension peaks. If someone is inside, this is where they would be. The officers stack up, exchange glances, and breach the door. But the garage is empty, containing only a car and scattered boxes. The relief is brief and hollow. Secure, the deputies turn their full attention to the kitchen and its 2 occupants. Valerie is beyond help, her injuries too severe for any medical intervention. The medics confirm what the officers already know. The 6-year-old has died at the scene. April, however, is still alive. Her wounds are bleeding but not immediately life-threatening, and she is rushed outside to a waiting ambulance. As paramedics work on her, officers begin to photograph her injuries, documenting every mark on her body. These images will later become critical evidence. At first glance, April appears to be a victim of the same violence that took her daughter. But as the officers study her wounds more closely, inconsistencies emerge. The cut on her neck is clean and precise, not the jagged defensive marks one would expect from a struggle. The wound on her stomach is similarly superficial. The blood on her clothing is heavy, but the pattern does not align with an attack from an assailant. Instead, it suggests she was present and active during the violence, not merely a passive recipient of it. The officers do not voice their suspicions yet, but the seeds of doubt have been planted. They begin to ask themselves a question that will shape the entire investigation. Is April a victim, or is she the one responsible for the carnage in that kitchen? Outside the house, Stephen Tuttle sits in the back of a patrol car, still shaking from what he has witnessed. Officers approach him gently, understanding that he is both a witness and a grieving grandfather. They ask him to recount everything he saw and heard from the moment he arrived. Stephen explains that April had been acting differently in the days before the attack, spending hours on her computer, becoming increasingly emotional and withdrawn. He had come to check on her because his calls had gone unanswered, and his concern had grown into alarm. When he pulled up to the house, he heard screaming from inside. He forced the door open and found the kitchen covered in blood. He saw Valerie on the floor and April beside her, and he immediately called 911. The officers ask about April's mental health history. Stephen hesitates, then admits that she struggled with drug issues as a teenager, but he insists that she had been stable for years after marrying Philip, Valerie's father. He cannot explain what drove her to this moment. He cannot imagine why she would harm her own child, but his account provides investigators with their first glimpse into April's state of mind before the tragedy. She was not herself, and whatever consumed her in those final days may hold the key to understanding the violence that followed. While Stephen remains outside, investigators place a call to Valerie Oliva, April's husband and Valerie's father, who is working out of state on a contracting job. The phone rings, and Philip answers, unaware that his world is about to collapse. The detective on the line chooses his words carefully, but there is no gentle way to deliver such news. Philip is told that something terrible has happened at his home, that Valerie is dead, and that April has been injured. The shock is immediate. Philip's voice cracks as he processes the information, and he insists that he is packing his things to return home immediately. He tells the detective that he is 4 hours away, that he should have been there, that this never would have happened if he had been home. The detective tries to reassure him, but the truth is that no one yet knows what happened. Philip provides crucial details, confirming that April had been acting strangely in recent weeks, obsessively reading disturbing material online. He mentions her computer, suggesting that investigators should examine it for answers. He also confirms that there were no known threats against the family, no enemies, no reason for anyone to target them. His words only deepen the mystery. If there was no attacker from outside, then the answer must lie within the house itself. With Philip on his way home, investigators turn their attention back to the crime scene, where forensic teams are carefully documenting every inch of the kitchen. The evidence is overwhelming. 2 knives are recovered, one on the dining table and one on the floor near Valerie's body. Blood spatter patterns indicate that the attack moved across the room, suggesting that Valerie may have tried to flee before she was caught. The absence of defensive wounds on April further complicates the picture. If an intruder had attacked both mother and daughter, April's arms and hands would show signs of struggle. They do not. Her wounds are isolated and superficial, consistent with self-infliction. The officers photograph everything, knowing that these images will become the foundation of their case. They also seize April's computer, recognizing that her online activity may hold the answers they need. In the meantime, they continue to question Stephen, asking about April's relationships, her routines, and any signs of recent distress. Stephen offers what he can, but his knowledge is limited. April and Philip had kept to themselves, and Stephen had not noticed anything obviously wrong in the days before the attack. The pieces of the puzzle are scattered, and investigators are only beginning to see the shape they form. The autopsy of Valerie Oliva is conducted the following morning, and the results send shockwaves through the investigation. The medical examiner documents more than 20 sharp force injuries across the child's body, concentrated on her chest, neck, and arms. The most significant finding is the presence of defensive wounds on Valerie's hands and forearms, injuries consistent with someone trying to block a blade. These wounds prove that Valerie was aware of the attack, that she struggled against it, and that she fought for her life until the very end. The force required to inflict such injuries is immense, far beyond what a child could generate. This was not a brief moment of violence. It was a sustained and deliberate assault. The medical examiner also notes that the wounds vary in depth and angle, suggesting that the attacker used significant strength and continued striking even after Valerie had fallen. The report leaves no doubt that this was a homicide, and a brutal one at that. The question of who committed these acts is now secondary to the question of why. What could drive a person to such extreme violence against their own child? The answer, investigators suspect, lies within the digital footprint left on April's computer, a device that now becomes the focus of their efforts. Forensic analysts begin the painstaking process of examining April's computer, and what they find is disturbing. Her search history reveals a woman consumed by dark and conspiratorial content. She had spent hours reading the Epstein files, delving into theories about hidden networks and secret cabals. She had accessed the dark web, navigating encrypted websites that exposed her to increasingly extreme material. Her browsing patterns suggest that she was not merely curious, but obsessive, spending late nights reading and rereading content that reinforced her growing paranoia. She had become convinced that hidden forces were threatening her family, that her daughter was in danger, and that extreme measures were necessary to protect them. The irony, of course, is that the only threat to Valerie was her own mother. Investigators also find searches related to mental health, as if April was aware that she was losing control but did not know how to stop it. The computer becomes a window into a mind that had fractured under the weight of fear and isolation. It does not excuse what she did, but it begins to explain how a mother could turn on her own child. The digital evidence is damning, connecting April's deteriorating mental state to the violence in the kitchen. Inside the house, alongside the computer and the blood-stained evidence, investigators make one more discovery that deepens the tragedy. A drawing, presumably created by April, or perhaps by Valerie herself, depicts a stick figure holding what appears to be a knife. Next to the figure are the words, "I am hungry." The drawing is crude, childlike in its execution, but its presence in the house is profoundly unsettling. It suggests that the idea of violence, of using a blade against another person, was present in the home long before the attack. Whether it was a dark joke, a cry for help, or something more ominous, no one can say. But the investigators cannot ignore it. The drawing adds another layer to the portrait of a family in crisis, a household where the boundaries between fantasy and reality had become dangerously blurred. Combined with April's internet activity, it paints a picture of a woman who was losing touch with the world around her, retreating into a private nightmare that ultimately consumed her. The drawing is photographed, bagged, and logged as evidence, a haunting reminder of the fragility of the human mind and the devastation that can follow when it breaks. April Oliva is formally charged with second-degree murder and held without bond as the investigation continues. But as more evidence comes to light, including the autopsy, the digital footprint, and the drawing, a Santa Rosa County grand jury elevates the charge to first-degree murder. The case against her is overwhelming. There is no sign of forced entry, no evidence of an intruder, and no plausible alternative suspect. April's own injuries are inconsistent with an attack, and her online activity reveals a descent into paranoia that preceded the violence. Her husband, Philip, is left to grieve his daughter and reconcile with the fact that his wife is the one responsible. The legal process moves slowly, with mental health evaluations and pretrial motions delaying a final resolution. But the outcome seems inevitable. April Oliva will face justice for the death of her 6-year-old daughter. The house on Nolan Drive remains silent, its doors locked, its windows dark. The community of Milton continues to mourn, remembering Valerie not as a case file or a statistic, but as a bright, smiling child whose life was taken far too soon. The story serves as a reminder that the greatest dangers do not always come from outside the home.